So the first one we're going to talk about is the section. So here's the write-up for the section. And these are sort of a little bit simplified. This is just us making a sort of simpler version in order for you to be able to have this conversation. The actual version is a little bit more detailed, a little bit more convoluted with a couple more issues in it. All right, the following drawing shows the first floor plan, including the framing members for the second floor. So it's the plan of the first floor, but the framing for the floor above, of Dr. Frankenstein's laboratory. It is a two-story building, but in the interest of time, we will just focus on the first floor. On the actual exam, you'll actually be looking at both floors. This is just to keep it simple. Note the following. First floor is slab on grade, frost depth is 48 inches, ceilings are 9 foot generally. Laboratory is a double height space open to above, because you have to be able to get the lightning from above to be able to get the whole thing to work, so it's open to above. But for our purposes, it's a double height space. The reception area has a 10-foot ceiling. Assume 10 inches for lighting and sprinkler piping. We'll talk about that in a second. Any duct smaller than a 12 by 12 can fit between joists. All others must run below the joist. So essentially, all the ducts are running below the joist, with the occasional little end pieces running up between them. And then draw the section. In this case, like I said, we're only going to deal with the first floor, but draw the section of the first floor at the cut line shown. So one of the things we should find quickly is where that cut line is, and include the floor-to-floor dimensions, the overall floor-to-floor heights. So let's take a look at what we're talking about here. So here's our floor plan. So this is the first floor plan. We've got the reception area up here, so this must be the front door coming in. We've got a corridor that's running through here called a rated corridor. Straight off from the reception is Igor, I can't remember. Igor's office. Igor's office. And then Dr. Frankenstein's office is back behind, so Igor is his sort of assistant. Down the way a little bit here, we've got a medical library, and we've got the evil plans office. And then the big room here is Frankenstein's laboratory. Now, I can't guess, obviously this is a little ridiculous. I'd be very surprised if they gave you Frankenstein's laboratory. However, I can guarantee you it's going to be a two-story building with one big room that is a double height space of some sort, and that there'll be rooms that wrap around it. Maybe it's part of a school and it's a little gymnasium with some classrooms wrapping around it, or maybe it's a library with a reading room and then some spaces around it, or it's a showroom space with some office spaces around it, something like that. It's going to be something very similar to this. So while this is sort of absurd, it's actually pretty similar to what's really going on. And then there's some other information here. We have these lines showing us the structure. So we can look around and find, in this case, it's 28-inch open web steel joists at 6 feet on center. And then we've got some other structure over here, 18-inch open web joists at 24 inches on center. And we had read previously that there was a 4-inch corrugated deck with a concrete fill on the previous page. So we would add that onto those. And then we also note that there's some, these darker lines are showing the path of the ductwork. For some reason that's not connected there. I'm not sure what happened there. And that ductwork is going to tell us, we have some sizes on there, and so we have to make sure that we accommodate the ductwork as we do our section cut. So here's the section cut. It's a little tight there, but you can see that's the section line running right through, and then we're looking that direction. So we can start thinking about this. The first thing we have to come up with is what is our floor to floor, so that we can draw our section overall. So first thing we need to note is if we kind of went back and looked, we would find out that all of these rooms and the corridor all have a 9-foot ceiling. So I'm going to put 9-foot ceiling here, ceiling height. And then it also mentioned that it's going to leave 10 inches for lighting and for sprinkler pipes. So if you think about it, if you imagine we have a room and you got somebody sitting in that room, sitting at a table or something, there's probably some light fixtures up above the ceiling in this sort of commercial kind of setting. There's probably some pipes running around that then come down and have little spray nozzles on them for the sprinkler heads. But if somebody was going to change something, if we decided to take one wall down and move it around a little bit or shift some desks around, these light fixtures might actually move around. They may get switched around in different locations. And so the flexibility that's required for that means that we want to be able to have just a few things in that sort of first section of area just above the ceiling. So you don't want any ductwork there. You don't want any of the structure there. You want to keep it as clear and open as possible so that if you need to readjust those lights, you can. So there's a logical place where they end up getting put, but essentially we're leaving that 10-inch space right there. So we've got the 9-foot down below, and then we leave that 10-inch space in order to be able to move those light fixtures and sprinkler heads around as necessary. So I'm going to add 10 inches to that. And then the next thing we're going to have is we're going to have some duct work here somewhere. So there's going to be some big duct that's got to be able to get around. And then above that, there's going to be our structure. So we've got the 9-foot ceiling, we've got the 10-inch space for the light fixtures and for the sprinkler. And then we have to figure out what our duct size is, and we have to figure out what our structure size is. So let's talk about this zone right here of our section cut. The structure we know is the 28 inches plus the 4-inch deck, so that's 32 inches. And then the question left is, how big is the duct that we need to be able to accommodate? So we look here, our section cut goes right across there, and there's our 12 by 20 supply duct. So we can do that. Obviously, you can always use the shorter number. So that would make that a 12-inch. Is that right? That is not right. How do I know
Mike?
That's not right? Well, because that happens to be what it is right where I do the section cut, but that's not the biggest duct that has to be accommodated. You wouldn't want to have the floor change heights or the ceiling change heights or anything. So you have to just set the ceiling height and then set the floor height, which means you have to be able to accommodate the biggest duct that you're going to have. So get rid of that so we can put a new number in. Let's scan around and find. There's a 10, that's too small, that's just even smaller. Those are all 10s. I got another thing. Oh, how about right there? I got a 24 by 30 and a 24 by 24, which means this is 24 inches.
Nice job, Paul H. Paul.
Way to go.
Threw that in there.
So our total floor to floor is going to add all of those up, which when we do so is going to be sort of equal to 14.6, I believe. Feel free to check that. So our total floor to floor is 14.6. Now, here's an interesting thing. We have one little sort of question mark spot here, though, which is the reception area. Because the reception area is exactly the same, except it has a 10-foot ceiling, has the same 10-inch area for the lighting and for the sprinklers. But now let's take a look in this zone. It's only one little area we don't really have to accommodate all of this other ductwork, which is in a different ceiling heighted area. It's a different set of relationships. It really only has to accommodate the biggest one in its own area, which in this case is 14 inches. So we've got a 1'2" here. And then its own structure, which is 18 inches plus the 4 inches for the slab. So we're at 22 inches, which is 110. So we add all of that up, and this ends up being, I believe, 1310, which is less than the 14.6, so the 14.6 drives it. So our floor to floor is 14.6. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody. What you're looking for is, what is the combination of ceiling height? Everybody's going to have the same space for lighting and sprinkler. You should check it. It might be 11 inches, it might be 8 inches, it could be a couple different numbers. 10 is the typical. But everybody's going to have that same thing anywhere in the building. But the combination of ceiling height, duct that has to be accommodated for, and then total structure, you're looking for the driving one that's going to establish the height of that second floor. And then if we were doing the full-on thing, we'd be doing exactly the same thing again, trying to establish the roof height as well. So it would be the same thing again. We would just be adding up all those same numbers and finding which one is the driving number.
I have a number of questions here about the orientation of the duct.
Yeah.
So some folks maybe aren't comfortable with the idea that the 24 by 30, that you're not taking, like, why aren't you taking the 30-inch height, right? Why are you assuming that it's the 24, the shorter height?
That's a very good question, and the answer is because I want to. If you think about it, like, why would I ever make it harder on myself? So there is no reason to make it 30 inches tall. The only thing that's going to do is make my building taller and cost money. Now, there are plenty of examples that we can all imagine. We just don't have enough room left to right to be able to fit in the 30 inches, so it has to go the other direction, or there's some other reason, like maybe there's a bigger duct somewhere else that it doesn't really matter whether the 30 inch is the driving one because there's a 46-inch one somewhere. So we can do the 30-inch tall if we want. Well, that's fine, but you would never accidentally choose to make it taller unless there was a good reason to do. There's no efficiency difference 24 by 30 versus 30 by 24. They're both relatively efficient. Obviously, the most efficient is going to be a square or a circle because it gives me less friction per perimeter area. But this 24 by 30 is reasonably efficient. One of the things you'll find often in these kinds of buildings is instead of it being 24 by 30, it's more like 15 by 42 or something like that, where you make it as pancakey as possible in order to just not have that ceiling come barreling down on top of everybody. So you're trying to make it as thin as possible. But as soon as you start making something that thin, it becomes way less efficient. And so you're not getting the same kind of flow and all of that. So generally you're trying to be, well, not square, a little bit less than square, save a little bit of height, and you're always going to choose the smaller dimension unless there's a reason. And in this vignette, they're never going to make it that complicated that they're going to give you a reason.
Right.
That would be way too hard to how would they even write it? It would be too complicated. Like, they're just not going to do that. So just always choose the smaller number. But the smaller number is likely to be something like 24 or 36 or 30, or because they're going to want you to realize, oh wow, that's a big duct that has to be fit in. And I can almost guarantee you it will not be what's right at where your section cut is.
Yeah, I feel like that's the gotcha that they're going to do. Is they're testing whether or not to look at all the different duct heights and all the different
by
structural
far the
situations.
biggest thing that they're looking for in this. Yeah.
So they're not going to quiz you on the intricacies of efficiency of a duct.
Right. Right. The fact that I just said a 15 by 48 or something is going to be much less efficient than a 20. That's way beyond what this vignette is about.
One other thing I'm noticing here, you drew a section, and then you kind of added up, and then you also drew all the different heights, and you sort of added them up. Is that something you would recommend? Is that something you're doing for this podcast that's weird, or is this a very good practice for sitting in the testing center?
I would absolutely do exactly what I just did. I might do it a little better than I just did it, but like maybe actually draw it right in here. So let's say 9 foot there, and then what was it, 24 here, and then 32 there. So that you can see it very simply and easily. You want to, on all of these things, you want to find a way to make sure that your quick thinking is graphically helping you to choose the right answers. So the fact that I put a little scale person in, it means that if I'm coming back 15 minutes later, I can't forget what I was drawing there. I can't get confused by what's the room and what's the duct or something like that. Make it as simple and fast as you can, but make it clear and simple and write it out as you go along. It'll make life much, much easier, especially when you find some other piece of information. Let's say we kept looking and we found another duct that we hadn't noticed earlier, because it can be a little complicated. You can, ducts can sort of slide in unusual locations. And so you want to be able to come back very easily and say, oh no, it turns out it's actually 36. I'm going to cross that out, put 36. I now can exactly see my thought process, how I found the problem, where the problem got fixed, and therefore when I add it up, I can see that my number adding up is actually, it's all following through, and I can see it. So absolutely. Remember that when you go into these things, the first thing that's going to happen is they're going to strip you down naked, so you just walk in with no clothes and nothing else. I'm slightly exaggerating for those of you who have taken one of these things already. They don't let you even bring your coat in most situations. I think most of the time you have to leave your coat outside. And you certainly can't bring in any phones or anything like that. They don't even want you to use your own pens and things. They give you a pencil and I think it's 3 sheets of paper. And maybe that depends on which vignette it is. But you get like a sheet of paper and a pencil, and that's what you've got. So, do this on your sheet of paper with your pencil and just keep track of things. And you can see that I did the one over here on this side because that's referring to this zone. And I did the other one over here on this side because that's referring to that zone. And so I'm graphically making it easier for myself to follow down the road.
And then this is obviously a little bit of a hot button topic here. A couple of folks are saying like, well, can I, how about if I just add a few inches here to round this off or X, Y, and Z. It just, this is one of those things that's like, there's a very clear answer. It's this plus this plus this plus this, and that's it. There's no rounding
and you don't need to do that.
No.
And that's part of what the 10 inches is for. The 10 inches, the light fixtures themselves will be 4 inches, and the pipe for the sprinkler is, it's a couple more inches just above that. So, you can fit that in probably in 6 or 6.5 or 7 inches. So giving it 10 inches, that's really your factor of safety right there. So you don't need to do anything beyond that. And the 10 inches actually is going to come from the program, like it'll be part of the program itself. It'll say, and leave 10 inches. It might say a different number. Like I said, it could say 8 inches, it could say 11 or 12 inches. Different, if things are highly flexible, you might make it more just to make it easier. If you think things are going to stay the same for a very long time, you might tighten it up a little bit to just save some height. But they're probably going to say 9, 10, something like that, and just give you that number, and that's where all that flexibility is. Don't overthink it.
Beautiful, thank you.
All right, so what we've got here is we've got the reception room in our section, we've got the corridor, then we've got Igor's office, and then Frankenstein's office. So let's do a quick draw up of what this looks like. All right, so this is going to be a very bad drawing. My apologies. Okay. So there's the reception. Here's the corridor. There's Igor's office. And there's Frankenstein's office. All right, so what do we know about all this? Well, for one, we know that this is all slab on grade. So I'm going to put the slab down. Remember that the tools are not lines. You're not drawing these things. You're grabbing something that says slab, and then you're placing the slab in place. It's not like you're drawing from scratch. Then we have, for our purposes, I'm going to just put a little line across here. This is not something that you would actually draw, but just to show that 10-inch zone. So that's something that we're just showing here for our purposes, but it's not actually shown on that. You just show the ceiling. And then I've got the duct. It doesn't really matter to get it exactly right. You just sort of get reasonably close to what the size is of the cut, leaving enough space for the biggest one, but you would want to draw in what's actually at the cut. And then you may have remembered that this is actually a structural line, and so our joists are running here.
While Mike is writing that, just as a reminder, NCARB offers software, and we've gotten a couple more comments. They offer this practice exam software for you, so make sure that you download it or you get access to it and that you practice.
Because it is all about being good at the program.
I had a question about, do they have a certain type of calculator in the software? The answer is make sure you go practice this so that you can find out exactly what tools you'll get.
Yeah.
And each one of them has like a practice problem as well, so you should definitely do that practice problem. It'll give you a good feel for solving one of them.
Well, not only is it a useful thing to do that, but it actually will give you a chance to not only practice using the software, but it'll give you a chance to practice how you're going to approach the project. Because each of these you want to know what, as soon as you turn the button on for the computer, you want to be able to just start racing through it. So okay, this is the basics of it. We've got our ceiling height at 10 foot over here at reception and 9 foot everywhere else. We've got that same 10-inch space there. We've got a duct in here somewhere. I'm actually drawing it as if we're cutting it that way. It's not really there, but so there's the basic section. And now there's some other stuff that we have to think about. So for one, this is a structural line coming down. This is a structural line, and this is a structural line. So each of those need to have footings. So we're going to go down, and this is again a tool. And I'm getting down, the reason I'm drawing it down there is because I'm below the frost depth, which I believe was 48 inches. And then I need this one as well. Do I do that down here? And the answer is no, because I don't need to get to the frost depth in the middle of the building. If I did need to do that, that means that the whole building is already frozen and all hell's broken loose and it's too late. So we don't do that, but we would put the footing right there directly below. So then the only other couple things left to think about would be what do we know, what's the difference between this partition and this partition? Well, this one is for the corridor. You'll note that this one, because it was a structural change, had to go all the way up to the underside of the deck. But this one, because it's part of the rated corridor, also has to go all the way up to the underside of the deck above. So this is a rated corridor, so that wall continues all the way up. Oop, sorry about that. Tricky little device here. This is also a rated part of that corridor, so that also goes up, and it's also a bearing wall, so it does anyway. Igor's office is not rated separately from Frankenstein's office. I'm just going to call it Frank's. So this one actually only needs to just go just above the ceiling, and it doesn't need to go up to the underside of the deck, because that's just a regular partition. This one that's part of the corridor is a rated wall, so it has to go all the way up. So that's pretty much it, and then we do the same thing up here on the second floor with a whole bunch of different numbers. There'll be a few complications like double height spaces. You might have to do the section through the double height space, at which point you might have windows above something, below this, above that. So it can get a little funny, but that's the process, right? You figure out what's the driving force, lay those numbers down so I get what my overall floor-to-floor height is. That means I can set that height, I can set the ceiling height, I can now start putting in all those other partitions, I can put in the structure, I can make sure everything meets it, I can do a little checklist, because I will have practiced this a couple times, and I'll check, all right, I've got frost depth, I've got not frost depth. Quite literally, you can fail this vignette if you put that middle one at frost depth, because it'll seem like you don't know what you're talking about. And then I check to make sure that the fire ratings are all in the right spot. I check to make sure that the ducts are in the appropriate locations and that all the numbers add up. I go back and check all my numbers again, and there you go. I'm all done.
Footing to the top or the bottom for frost depth?
So
I've been dying to ask this question too, so I
this is one of those sort of funny things. So if it says 48 inches, then technically that is 48 inches. Now, one of the things that people do all the time here is they just add their own little factor of safety in, and they instead take the 48 to there, if you will. And so that means that this whole thing is just a factor of safety down beyond. But the frost depth is referring to specifically the bottom of the footing. So in the real world, I often do it the other way, but there's no need to on the exam. And the reason I do it the other way in the real world is because, you know, I've been out on job sites and, you know, things that are supposed to be at a certain level, maybe there was some stiffer soil there and they just didn't quite dig it down, and so it's 6 inches higher than it was. Like, there's all kinds of things that they do, and that's fine. You know, it's the life of the project. You just don't want a, you know, inspector coming along and measuring it and suddenly it's wrong and you're pulling things out. And so I just add it in as a factor of safety usually, personally, but that's not necessary for this.